Nirvana is etched into music history as one of rock music's most influential trios. They will always be most known for the iconic lineup of Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Grohl, but the band actually went through many different lineup changes and variations. Dave Grohl was their sixth drummer, and the person most visible on their debut album's cover is Jason Everman, who was briefly their second guitarist for half of a year in 1989. Kurt Cobain would say in interviews that he always envisioned Nirvana as a four-piece band. 4 years after Jason Everman's brief stint, they became a four-piece once again in late 1993 with the addition of the legendary Pat Smear, a punk pioneer who had already made music history a decade prior with his groundbreaking hardcore punk band, The Germs. Nirvana were huge fans of The Germs, and now found themselves with a musical hero in their lineup, who was adding an entirely new layer to their sound both musically and sonically. After Pat joined, Kurt is on record many times saying how much he felt Pat contributed to the band, and how happy he was that Nirvana was now a four-piece. In this video, we will be focusing on the unsung hero of the Utero tour, breaking down Pat Smear's complete Nirvana rig, how his unique playing style changed Nirvana, and I will show you how I recreated his sound, what I used, and my settings. Per the man himself, Pat has said that his role in Nirvana was to be Kurt's double track, with Kurt's guitar panned to the left and Pat's to the right. Nirvana's live guitar sound was now the biggest, widest, and heaviest it had ever been. Understandably so, Kurt's setup and sound will always get the spotlight and the most attention, but in the big picture, he was only 50% of the guitar sound on that tour. There is no In Utero tour tone as we know it without the other 50% completing it. So what gear did Pat use to achieve this? Let's go through his whole signal chain, starting with his guitars. Pat played a wide variety of guitars throughout the tour. His three most notable and perhaps most well-known Nirvana guitars would be his red 70s Hagstrom H2N, which was actually his first guitar and was also used in The Germs, a USA Fender Stratocaster in midnight blue that he used on Live and Loud, and the Harmony Buck Owens acoustic that he used on Unplugged. This guitar actually belonged to Chris, and Pat used it for the entire tour and for Unplugged. All three of these guitars had the same pickups Kurt was using in his main In Utero tour guitars. The Hagstrom and the Strat had Seymour Duncan JBs, while the Buck Owens had the same Bartolini 3AV that Kurt's Martin D18E had. The guitar you'll be hearing throughout this video is my build of Pat's legendary Hagstrom H2N, modded to how he had it during the In Utero tour. It's made up of a Hagstrom FT20 body and a vintage 70s H2N neck. It has the same pickups that Pat used on the tour, Seymour Duncan JB in the bridge and Seymour Duncan 59 in the neck. This is one of my top favorite guitars that I own. As Pat's red Hagstrom was his main Nirvana guitar, I see this as the counterpart / other half to Kurt's main guitar, Skystang 1. These are the two main guitars that provided the huge sound of Nirvana's biggest headlining tours, In Utero tour's stage left and stage right guitars. There are at least 3 other Hagstroms that he used in Nirvana and several Mexican-made Strats. While it wasn't used on the In Utero tour, a very noteworthy one is his blue Mosrite Mark V. He used it on Saturday Night Live, his debut performance with Nirvana. This was actually originally Kurt's guitar. Kurt gave it to Pat, but it had water damage and needed extensive repairs. At the time of me recording this video, currently the only known footage we have of Pat playing it is on SNL 93. When it comes to the specifics, like what strings he used, I can tell you for certain what he had on the Buck Owens, because I have one of Pat's actual acoustic string packs from the In Utero tour. This is something I've had for a little while and I've kind of kept it to myself, but I feel like this video is the perfect opportunity to show this to you. I've become really good friends with Pat's tech, John Wescott. Through him, I was able to get my Hagstrom pickguard signed by Pat. When I received my pickguard back, Pat had included a surprise present for me. One of his unused packs of acoustic strings from the In Utero tour. Dean Markley 8515 bronze. He said that this pack was on the bus and with the crew during the tour but never ended up being used. He even signed the cover of the pack for me. It's surreal to own a piece of music history like this, an actual legit artifact from my favorite tour of all time. I'll never be able to thank both Pat and John enough for this dreamlike gift. I'm extremely honored. I've got it proudly framed with my unused In Utero tour ticket that I bought on eBay many years ago. Alright, let's next cover Pat's pedal board. Huge shout out and thank you to Nirvana guitar tech Earnie Bailey, one of my heroes and someone who I'm honored to call my friend, for sharing the following information about Pat's In Utero Tour pedal board. I just want to throw out there so he gets the proper credit he deserves. Ernie not only set up Pat's guitars and pedal board for this tour, but he also designed and built the rigs that everyone in the band used on this tour. This man, in a sense, sonically designed the In Utero Tour. Pat's pedal board was the following: Proco Turbo Rat, Electro Harmonix Small Clone, Boss DS2, Sansamp, and Electro Harmonix Memory Man Deluxe. Every pedal aside from the Memory Man was given to Pat by Kurt. What you are looking at here is a recent video of Pat's actual In Utero Tour pedals. This was sent to me courtesy of Earnie Bailey and is being shared with permission. When it comes to how Pat used the pedals, my personal guess is that the Memory Man was used on Scentless Apprentice and the noisy end of show jams. I know you'd want to think that he used it on radio-friendly unit shifter, but while Kurt is using the polychorus in that song, Pat just seems to be striking muted strings. To me, it doesn't seem like he has any other effects going during this beyond distortion. And speaking of distortion, of the three that he had at his feet, which ones did he use and when? To be frank, I don't really know for certain. From listening to the high quality soundboard audio that we have of this tour, it sounds like he mainly relied on the Sansamp for the bulk of his distorted tones. Which would make sense because he said himself that his main role was to be Kurt's double track, and Kurt's main distortion was very obviously the Sansamp. I feel like I do hear the Boss DS2 being used on the more punky songs, for lack of a better term. Songs that didn't seem to need as much articulation in the individual notes, such as Territorial Pissings. Something interesting happens at Live and Loud in Pat's channel during Scentless Apprentice that I want to point out. During the bridge/anti-solo noise section, I believe he's stacking two different distortion pedals. When he goes back into the main riff immediately after this part, we can hear a quick click and his distorted tone changing. I feel like I'm getting a similar sounding result when I have both my Sansamp and Rat clone on at once and I turn off the Sansamp. The small clone would have been used in the expected songs, like Come As You Are and the verses of Smells Like Teen Spirit and In Bloom, the same portions where Kurt had his small clone going. Pat's amp setup was extremely similar to Kurt's, and again, was made up of parts that were given to him by Kurt. He had a Mesa Boogie Studio Pre with Crest 4801 power amp going into Marshall cabs. Identical amp rig to Kurt on this tour. The difference is what type of speakers they had in their cabs. Kurt got new Marshall cabs for the tour with vintage 30s, which were supposedly his new favorite. And Pat got Kurt's old 4x12 Marshall cabs that had Celestion G12 T75s. Pat actually ended up using his Nirvana amp rig for many early Foo Fighter tours before eventually retiring it. What you've been hearing throughout this entire video is my recreation of Pat's Nirvana tone. To recreate his amp setup, I'm using Nirvana's Paramount, which is their clone of the clean section of the Mesa Boogie Studio Pre. That is going into my Mesa Boogie 5-band EQ pedal, the official pedal version of the Studio Pre's graphic EQ. Those are then going into my Moyer Cab X2 IR loader pedal, and I'm using IRs of Marshall 4x12 cabs with Celestion G12 T75 speakers. So overall, while Pat's setup was very similar to Kurt's, it was different enough to where Kurt and Pat's guitars had their own unique voice in the mix and complemented each other beautifully. Kurt's tone was very low mid-heavy, it was dark and menacing, while Pat's tone was brighter and had a high-end sparkle that was the perfect bookend to Kurt's heavier tone. Kurt's sound and rig will always get the bulk of the spotlight and the attention, but Nirvana's In Utero Tour guitar sound is very much the sum of these two parts. It would have sounded completely different if Pat's sound was not there. Another important thing that Pat brought to the band was a new level of musicality. While Kurt relied on his two-finger power chords, Pat complemented that with full-on bar chords and traditional open chords when the situation called for it. In addition to his brighter tone expanding their sound, the extra notes in his fuller chords expanded Nirvana's musical vocabulary, adding a depth and a richness that had never been there before. Pat's tone here is just overall one of my favorite Nirvana tones that I've dialed in. There are numerous Nirvana tones that I feel like are very specific, like they only work well in the application of the specific show or album they are from, but this sound is just a great overall distorted rock tone. I hope you enjoyed learning about the rig, tones, and overall important impact of Pat Smear in Nirvana. I personally think Nirvana were at their peak and reached their prime after he joined. And words cannot describe how much I wish we would have gotten a Nirvana studio album with this lineup. But thankfully, we have a lot of really great recordings and videos from the Utero tour, so we can still experience and enjoy the form of Nirvana that Kurt himself was the most happy with. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special shout out to my Patreon supporters. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Nirvana Guitars, and subscribe right here on YouTube for more weekly Nirvana gear videos, and I'll see you in the next one.